Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the afternoon keynote. We're going to get started here in about 1-2 minutes, so if everybody wants to take a seat and get ready to welcome, we're going to start off with the Carrie Ryberg Award. Thank you.
Greetings and welcome to the afternoon session. The Carrie Ryberg Award is presented each year to a lawyer who exemplifies the best in public interest environmental advocacy. Carrie Ryberg graduated from the University of Oregon School of Law in 1989 and immediately began representing grassroots groups working out of his home for little to no pay. He fought to protect forests and wildlife. Tragically, Carrie died in a car accident that year, cutting short his life's work and potential legacy. But the Carrie Ryberg Award keeps his legacy alive. Now in its 25th year, is being presented to a person whose work is aligned with Carrie's independent public interest spirit. It is my honor to present the 2014 Carrie Ryberg Award to my good friend and University of Colorado Law School classmate, Roger Flynn. In a perfect world, Roger would be introduced by Jerry Garcia. And I understand the conference organizers were unable to get Ian McKellen here on short notice. So here we are. About the time I met Roger, a respected environmental litigator said, to be a good environmental lawyer, you must first be a good lawyer. And I would add to that and say that to be a really good environmental lawyer, you must also be a good person. And Roger Flynn is an excellent person. I would say he is an awesome dude. He's a devoted family man, husband and father, an environmental lawyer, and also a professor of law. Fresh out of law school, Roger created the Western Mining Action Project. Like a true environmentalist, he surveyed the field and found a niche that no one else was exploiting. And he realized that no group was focused on stopping the destruction of poorly planned and sited mining activities. So he created the Western Mining Action Project and created a way to work for clients that had no money at all by proving his worth to a variety of foundations and funding sources that enabled Roger and his organization and colleagues for the past 20 years to be an active force throughout the West. Roger's litigated cases against federal and state agencies and mining companies in Colorado, Arizona, Nevada, Washington, Alaska, California, and Oregon. And like a good lawyer, he uses all tools available, including the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Water Act, the Administrative Procedures Act, the Clean Air Act. And in one case I looked at yesterday, Roger based a claim on the 1926 executive order signed by Calvin Coolidge. He is thorough, he is optimistic, he's a wonderful guy, and I would like to ask previous recipients of the Carrie Ryberg Award to join me in presenting this year's award to Roger. So if you will, please come up. Ecce Uomo. Roger Flynn. Greetings. Come on up. Matt Kinney.
Roger, now you have to find a place for this on your wall somewhere for your...
Yeah,
And bring it
like the
back.
Stanley Cup again.
Yeah.
Wow, what a bunch of names. I mean, geez.
All right.
Oh, thanks. What should I do with it? Just leave it here?
Why don't you bring it with you, or we'll find a place for it. Okay. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, thanks, everybody. I mean, to get it from my peers, particularly this conference, it means so much to me. I remember when Rick and I scrounged up some money when we were in law school back in 1990, came out here for the first time, and I was blown away. It was so moving and so powerful, and just the spirit of the people. I knew I had found my clan, my tribe. It was like being on the road with the dead, you know, with our fellow deadheads. It was so much fun. It was different, but just as good. And so it was my second clan, so to speak. And I vividly remember back, and those were the heady days, Redwood Summer. We had more panels on how to stop a timber sale with your body than a lawsuit. So I was like, wow, this is really cool. And I remember we had tables. We ate at that time in these big tables here. And I was sitting down that night with Terry Tempest Williams, who I just met, and she, you know, the great author and naturalist. And we were just talking about living a life of passion, living a life from your heart and your soul, not your wallet, not your bank account, not your property or you know, your house or whatever. And it just, I was starting to get really emotional. She came up here, stood right here, and gave a speech. I was so emotional, I actually had to leave and went out, and I found the biggest tree I could find on campus. It was pouring rain, you know, and I just wept and sobbed like a baby. I was so happy. It was one of those moments of clarity in your life where joy just takes all over you. And I just cried and cried and cried. And I knew then that I had found my vocation in life. And it was just one of my greatest moments in life occurred basically in this room and just outside in the trees. And so I'd like to thank the previous award winners. I got a shout out to Jeff Parsons, my partner at the Western Mining Action Project for the last 15 years. Best colleague, lawyer, and friend you could have. And let me tell you, the mining company's worst nightmare. Uranium mining company's worst nightmare. So this award also, Jeff has done so much great work. And lastly, I just want to thank the students for putting it on every year. You know, the students for putting it on every year. To see the passion that they have, like a lot of us old timers had 20, 25 years ago, whatever, is great. That's why we come back every year. And so I really want to thank them, but mostly I want to thank that big tree out there somewhere that has my tears on it. And yes, I hugged it, and I kissed it, of course, I think many times. So thanks for the conference. It's just been one of the greatest experiences of my life. And to get this award is, man, you can't beat that. So thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Cooper Brinson. I'm a second-year law student and also one of the conference co-directors this year. Before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to recognize two very valuable people to land, air, and water, and without which this conference definitely would not happen. And they're standing, or rather sitting, there in the back corner, Ann Hoggard and Rory Isbell. They're our 1L reps, and we could not do this conference without them. So our next speaker is no stranger to this community. She's definitely helped out a lot of people in this room, I'm sure. And she's a revolutionary in the truest sense of the word. And so is her firm, the Civil Liberties Defense Center. It's the CLDC's 10th anniversary. And they just recently represented, I believe, their 900th activist. It's quite the impressive feat. So if you will, please welcome Lauren Regan to the stage.
No pressure. May it please the court. Oh, wrong speech, right. Well, my name is Lauren Regan, and I actually graduated from the U of O Law School not too many years ago. But I was one of those kids that loved animals growing up, and from a very early age, I wanted to be a veterinarian so that I could save animals. And one day my parents arranged for a veterinarian friend to take me with them to work. And what they didn't know is that the vet was a large animal vet that was heading out to a giant dairy farm that included veal crates. And so as I stood there as a 7-year-old looking at these doleful baby cow eyeballs, I put together, the suffering of this animal and the fact that it was the meat my mom had cooked up. And that was the last time that I ate anything with a face. And a few years later, around the age of 10, I realized that veterinarians sometimes had to inflict pain on animals, and they had to deal with blood, which was not one of my favorite things. So I announced to my family that I was going to be an animal lawyer at the age of 10. And I didn't really know what that meant. Nobody in my family was a lawyer, but I just wanted to save animals, and that seemed like a good way to go about doing it. And so I came from an environmental and animal rights background and basically went to law school to try and make my activism more strategic. I was not a real big fan of jail, and I felt that becoming a lawyer would be the best way for me to fight for what I believed in. And since I had the grades and the patience to endure 3 years of law school, I went for it. And I always knew why I went to law school and what I wanted to do with my brain. And I wasn't going to let my law school debt or Sally Mae dictate how I used those skills when I went out into the world. So while at the University of Oregon Law School in the late 1990s, on weekends I would occasionally head up to the woods and join incredible forest defenders at the Warner Creek blockade. This was a civil disobedience protest that lasted for over a year and saved an incredible swath of forest land that had been suspiciously arsoned after the area had been saved by environmentalists. And many of my heroes from that campaign are in this audience, and I learned a lot from them. But during the week, I was fortunate to have my first law clerk experience be at the Western Environmental Law Center. And the first case I ever litigated just happened to be the Warner Creek litigation. My supervising attorney was Marianne Dugan, who is a rock star, and it turns out she's also my favorite co-counsel and has her office downstairs from mine 17 years later, and we continue to do cases together. About 2003, she and a bunch of organizers and activists helped me form the Civil Liberties Defense Center, which is a nonprofit that basically at that point, at the beginning, provided environmental and animal rights activists with legal support. I developed Know Your Rights trainings in order to help illuminate the legal process for activists. And I think, that there is an essential role to play for even environmental civil litigators in that thing. What I learned from the Warner Creek blockade and working on the Warner Creek litigation kind of reinforced my belief that lawsuits and lockdowns could work together successfully and that lawyers didn't have to separate themselves from the front lines. In fact, they can play a vital role. Serving as expert witnesses in criminal cases when we bring necessity defenses, where basically we try to teach jurors why the environmental destruction itself is illegal and thus the civil disobedience justified under the law, as well as helping activists be more strategic in their campaigns. After graduating from law school, my legal career began by practicing environmental law, but as injunctions were lost and salvage riders were passed, I realized that the politicians that were beholden to money and industry and Congress really made that system really fragile. I began to see the failures of the legal system to protect the environment. And when that legal system faltered, grassroots frontlines activists put their bodies and their freedoms in the path of the chainsaws or the bulldozers or the pipelines or industry and took direct action to try and stop capitalism and profit and greed, or at least try to make it more expensive for those corporations. And so one case, I represented an environmental group, and we lost an injunction, and logging day was nearing. And they asked me to go out to the logging site in order to help them do media. And when I got out there, all of my clients were locked down to pieces of trucks and logging equipment, and I sat there for hours watching as the police attempted to extract them and then hauled them off to jail. And as I watched that process happen, I thought, I needed to learn a little bit more about this criminal law stuff, and saw that that was potentially a hole in our movement that I might be able to help with. A lot of environmentalists that time were not really getting great legal defense when they got arrested, and so they would kind of leave the legal process really disheartened. They were on long probation terms, or they got stiff sentences, and so that was kind of the function that we decided the CLDC would serve. And as Cooper mentioned, in the last 10 years, we have defended over 900 activists for free, and we have trained... And we've trained over 5,000 activists and communities on what their rights are, so that they'd know what they were getting into before they got there. And more than representing activists and getting good outcomes in the legal system, I think one of the biggest benefits that I serve and that CLDC serves for activist communities is that the activists get to be represented as political activists in the legal system. We help bring their issues and the reasons that they got arrested into the court system, and they realize that their lawyer is fighting as hard as possible for them. They understand what's going on with the legal process, and even if they end up getting hosed by a rural conservative judge, they leave the court process with their head held high and return to the movement rather than running scared, which was sort of what had been happening at that time. To give you an example, in mid-2000, forest defenders were charged with a crime that had been passed by the Oregon legislature, basically as a gift to the timber and ranching industries. It was called interfering with agricultural operations, and it was a law that, according to the legislative history, was specifically passed to stop Earth First from blockading logging roads. And so when over 60 activists were arrested one summer in stopping the largest post-fire timber sale in the history of the United States, they were all charged with this crime. And we decided to challenge the constitutionality of it. And 3 years later, after up and down to the Oregon Court of Appeals, that court ruled that the law was unconstitutional and threw it off its books and dismissed over 100 activist cases that were pending with those charges. And in 2005, the largest federal roundup of environmental and animal rights activists occurred. Some of my former activist clients from those environmental groups and friends from those earlier days were being federally charged with conspiracy, arson, and possession of incendiary devices for a series of economic sabotage actions against wild horse roundups and slaughterhouses, GMO trees, and timber companies. That they were conducted in the name of the Earth Liberation Front and Animal Liberation Front. The one thing that unifies those two groups is their motto, "Do no harm to any living thing." And despite the fact that no one was injured or even threatened with injury in those actions, U.S. Attorney Alberto Gonzales held a press conference and called the activists engaged in property damage terrorists. I began representing the non-cooperating defendants in those cases, those who chose to remain on the side of the environmental movement and not on the side of the government, and chose not to snitch on their co-defendants. They were threatened with life plus 1,115 years in prison for those actions. And the average prison sentence for arson is 2 years. So we quickly realized that these activists were being targeted in very extreme ways. And as that was happening, industry and corporations were kind of rubbing their hands with glee with the idea that they'd finally found a way to shut down the environmental movement, or at least the direct action component of it. They were spending millions and millions of dollars to spy and infiltrate and provoke and disrupt those movements. And thus, the Green Scare came to light through those court cases. I was happy to report that after all of those threats, my non-cooperating clients got between 3.5 and 9 years in prison, and they did do all of that prison time. But as a result of those arrests and the police and federal harassment, the prosecution, the imprisonment, the police brutality, as word got around that I was working on all of those issues, other movements that couldn't find legal support started asking us to help. And we saw the suffering in those movements too. Immigrant families torn apart by deportation, communities of color harassed and abused by the police, trans and gay communities evicted and discriminated against because of their choices. And in working with those communities, we began to see a lot of connections and common difficulties. As my fellow activists were jailed, prosecuted, and sometimes beaten or traumatized by the police and the state, I began to master areas of law that I never thought I would practice: criminal defense and constitutional law, federal civil police and government misconduct. I even learned immigration law so that I could give immigration trainings to try and prevent deportations in rural communities. Today, we defend activists from all lefty stripes, including forest defenders and animal liberationists, anti-capitalist, LGBT activists, workers, the homeless, Indigenous communities, and other communities of color, as well as a whole new segment of post-9/11 targets, including Muslims and their mosques, undocumented workers, hacktivists, and whistleblowers. By working among this broad spectrum of dedicated activists, I've slowly built connections between and among their various movements, observing, learning, and connecting them through common ground and common enemies. The struggle today, I believe, must be even more radical in nature, exhibiting a level of intellectual courage and commitment equal to our increasingly global and crisis-ridden age. People with legal expertise must play an integral part in that struggle. Through the last 16 years as an activist lawyer, I've come to understand the necessity of weaving together all available tactics to defend the earth and working with people against what has effectively become a corporate state. Without a unified strategic plan to mobilize massive amounts of people, so many that we, the people, are so numerous that we can't be gunned down or jailed, and so powerful that we can no longer be drowned out by a mass media system enslaved to the dollar, we will not achieve the radical changes that are going to be necessary and even more urgently required to save the planet from being plundered by that corporate state. So after brooding on that complexity, I recalled a political science class that taught that labor was the mediator of the metabolic interaction between society and nature, and it was missing. When thinking about how to bring the machine to a halt, it became clear that workers are the linchpins. For change to happen, those directly engaged with environmentally damaging production need to be the agents of that change. And despite the unfortunate fact that the proportion of organized workers has shrunk in the US, two things are still clear. One, the ranks of the working class have grown significantly, with more and more workers falling into the category of working poor. And two, workers have the power to hit the system where it hurts by stopping it from functioning and by striking. Can you imagine if everyone working for Monsanto just stopped coming to work? The unions will play a big role in this, creating identities that can organize campaigns as social movements. They can become corporate partners of management. They can take part in negotiations with government and business, or cooperate with environmental movements, becoming part of new social movements. The environmental movement has attempted to work with labor many times over the last 50 years or so without really building strong roots with which to grow in a mass scale. I believe that the new rendition of an inclusive climate justice movement provides the opportunity, and more so the obligation, to merge our voices and our movements in a way that will create the needed tidal wave to eradicate the polluters and desecrators who are killing life. The reality is that without the majority of humans in opposition to the current system, it will continue to drive us toward increased suffering. Kind of like that whack-a-mole game at carnivals where you might win one battle, but then it pops back up and begins to kill anew. So right now I work with an activist named Tim DeChristopher. He was sent to prison for bidding on oil and gas leases and kind of monkey-wrenched the oil and gas auctions and went to prison as a result of that simple action. But he is often saying these days that the environmental movement made a mistake in trying to take responsibility for climate change because it's just an impossible task for us to undertake and to fix. Anyone who thinks that it's possible to counter climate change and the planetary environmental crisis as a whole without opposing and in part superseding the logic of capital accumulation and consumption and population is in denial of the very clear findings of climate science and critical social science, which points to the immediacy and unprecedented scale of the present crisis and the need for truly revolutionary social change. So for the last several years, I've been developing and providing legal support to the tar sands resistance and other climate justice campaigns around the country. We mix activist defense and immigration law and labor law, and we put it together in a toolkit that is as inclusive to this movement as possible. We provide criminal defense, and we advise other lawyers who might not have experience in how to do their represent activists. We represent activists when they get sued by the corporations, which are called slap suits. We do grand jury resistance, as well as suing police and government for brutality and unlawful spying, kind of a one-stop shop for activist defense. And I organize on a daily basis with these amazingly intelligent, committed activists who are building the spoons that are going to be needed to start stirring this pot. And I've witnessed a growing sense among activists of all stripes that we must not only work across movements, but we need to build real and serious relationships, strong enough to wage a long-term, unified fight for survival that involves trust among us. One day soon, we the people, whether we identify as environmentalists, workers, parents, or whatnot, will together take to the streets or the commons, and we'll take the reins of production and we'll mediate our relation to the planet in a truly democratic way for the benefit of us all. And so with that, I'm honored to introduce you to my new ally and a hardcore, long-term activist, Richard Monje. I first met Richard at a conference we were both asked to speak at. It was called the National Democracy Conference in Madison, Wisconsin. And the focus of it was people, planet, and peace over profit. And it would later become what we now work on called the Global Climate Convergence. And I know Jill Stein will talk a little more about this on Sunday. She's one of our fellow organizers as well. And people are coming from all movements and communities of faith and states and towns all over the country to get involved in the building of a long-term mass movement. But over dinner one night during that conference, the vegan environmental animal rights lawyer and the not-so-vegan Chicano labor leader discussed movement history and lessons learned, future goals and outcomes, to not only combat climate change, but to build the movement that would be necessary to achieve real social justice for everyone. And it is in those moments that I believe true solidarity can be built. Richard is the son of Mexican immigrants. He began his activism in LA County as a teenager, where he learned early on that the state will attempt to manipulate and destroy movements when he was shot by the LA County sheriffs at an anti-Vietnam War protest. From there, his activism ignited, as often is the case with experiences like that. And Richard has organized with the Texas Farm Workers, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, Steel Workers, and Workers United. He's a longtime activist for the fight for immigrant rights and the fight against corporate citizenship. He lives in Chicago, where he's now the vice president of the Workers United, SEIU, and the Midwest Joint Board of Chicago, which is basically the Labor Party there. This is a union that's in the forefront of the fight against the attack on workers in the Midwest, and a union that's renowned for its organization of low-income workers, particularly Latinos and other minority workers. He helps to organize small shops, not the big giant manufacturing shops, and he works with community organizations that are known as worker centers that help workers learn their legal rights. Richard does a lot of difficult organizing as part of a broader effort to help people understand why unions are relevant and important. He also helped create the union's leadership school for rank and file members, and understands that one of his primary responsibilities, as with all of us, is building young leadership. And you will never see him without a younger Latino by his side, shadowing him wherever he goes. Richard has a brilliant strategic mind. He's experienced, practical, yet radical and revolutionary. His analysis, as well as his leadership within those communities in the United States and around the world, will be directly responsible for the forthcoming ecological mediation between industrial genocide and survival of the planet and its inhabitants. His views and efforts on climate justice do not necessarily represent the general view of trade unions. In fact, it probably doesn't even represent the majority view of the members of the union he represents. However, the climate change positions of his union depend to a high degree on his ability to convince his colleagues and the broader membership of his views. He is one of those opinion makers within the worker movements that matters. And that's why I believe that it is so important to the climate justice movement that leaders like Richard play an integral role in our organizing efforts. People like Richard represent what is possible in terms of the direction that trade union environmental policies could be developed to assist the climate change that's so necessary today. And so please join me in struggle in welcoming Richard Monje.
Thank you very much, Lauren. I was really impressed with that introduction, to tell you the truth. And thank you, Land, Air, and Water, and brothers and sisters participating in this important conference. Prior to coming here, I looked over the last 31 years of the brochures and subjects that have been covered at this conference in so many different ways. And I have a profound respect for the issues being addressed and explored at these conferences over the last 31 years, and this year certainly from an intellectual, legal, academic, and activist perspective. And was certainly most impressed with the presentation the brothers presented on what was happening in China. Very important subject that I had not known how things were being struggled with in China, not from an ideological perspective, but certainly from the perspective of what's happening for the Chinese people. I have been privileged to have grown up in a time of great turmoil and change. In the 60s was very important from a whole bunch of different angles. I had the opportunity to participate with my brothers and sisters in East Los Angeles when, because of the treatment of Spanish-speaking children, they would be punished and ostracized and humiliated in the high schools. So we organized a walkout and a strike in 6 high schools in East Los Angeles for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, and ultimately garnered bilingual education, bilingual administrators, and bilingual teachers. And it was a very important moment of awakening for me. Of course, right after that, I got kicked out of high school. So, as you can imagine, the influences of teenage girls, anti-war demonstrations and meetings and battles that were taking place, and certainly the police brutality that continues to this day, were a constant pull towards organizing and attempting to fight back. However, from a standpoint, I think one of the things that's absolutely essential that we have mastered, I think, certainly in our joint board. I represent 20,000 members in the Midwest, covering 8 states, and certain important states based on what's happening to labor over the last period of time and the attack against collective bargaining rights in Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and certainly potential right-to-work laws in Missouri, Minnesota, and generally attacking the core and heart of the labor movement for this country, and in many ways, including Chicago, for the world, and certainly expressed in May Day. But a while back, joining this organization, we began to grapple with a question that our members were asking in the workplace. That if we keep losing, why am I paying union dues? That if you keep negotiating concessions, we keep losing arbitrations, we keep losing at the bargaining table. If they get fired for a year and a half before their case goes to arbitration, which is an old sense of justice delayed is justice denied. 2 of your leaders get fired, whether in an organizing drive, or 2 of your stewards get fired, immediately fear and intimidation spreads throughout the workplace. And then the questions come hard and fast. Why am I paying union dues? So we had to try to answer that. And to do that, we went back and attempted to realize that combined with that, the second aspect is every year, 30 to 40% of our leaders, our stewards, would be, they'd lose their jobs, they'd move on, they'd retire. So we would lose our leadership, and we constantly had to deal with people that were coming into the organization with less and less experience. So we decided to organize leadership schools. These leadership schools, from our perspective, needed to not just teach the technical skills of grievance handling, of the legal technicalities of how to bargain a contract, but literally, if we were going to have fighters, people needed to know what they were fighting for and how to fight in a new environment with a weakened labor movement, with an environment that was anti-labor, and what were the necessary requirements that people needed to know. From our point of view, when you look at the history of the United States, it's one history of incredible advancements in the face of many difficulties. The difficulties that the abolitionists faced in ending slavery, which was free labor in this country, which ended up influencing our entire history and shaping our relations as a people, shaping our relations with the most vulnerable sections of society. It was important for us to begin to create a new labor leader, a labor leader that could understand the historical developments that impacted and influences them. For example, to understand the fact that prior to the Civil War, that the slaveholding states were losing strength and power and needed to expand into new territories and to shape them into states to try to maintain the majority in the Senate, that the United States provoked a war with Mexico, taking 1/3 of its land in Texas and shaping that whole history. But to know that prior to the war with Mexico, that the United States approached the President of Mexico and the Congress of Mexico and asked them to allow the slave chasers to go into Mexican territory and recapture the slaves that would escape into Mexican territory that they couldn't do at the time. And Mexico went back and debated it for several months in their Congress, and after several months of debate, came back and said, absolutely not. So the United States, in order to continue with their program of protecting and defending slavery in the United States, provoked a war with Mexico that most people refer to as John Wayne and the Alamo and all that. But certainly a component part of history that people don't understand of what are people willing to do, cross borders, cross nationalities, cross languages, in order to defend the human right and the human dignity to live free. And, so going back and trying to understand our history and teaching our labor leaders to understand that perspective, who they are, who we are, who are our friends, and who are our enemies, for us was an absolutely essential part of that. So we began our labor education project from the standpoint of slavery and the development from there and how that impacted the shape of labor, both its successes and its failures. And successes in the sense of when you go back and you look at the 1920s and 30s and a near revolution in this country and the Congress negotiating terms to alleviate the pressure of that revolution in the form of the National Labor Relations Act, and they didn't do it because they needed to. Or I take that back. They only did it because they needed to, because production could not be guaranteed. Between 1930 and 1935, there was a strike wave that swept this country in a phenomenal way. For us in our union, I should tell you, the predecessors to Workers United is the International Lady Garment Workers Union, the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, and the Textile Workers Union of America. Textile Workers Union of America, you might remember, is Norma Ray, the battle to organize J.P. Stevens over 27 years, and Cannon Mills over 23 years. Also, the International Lady Garment Workers Union was the organization that grew and developed as a result of the Triangle Waist shirt fire in New York, and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers was the union formed in Chicago in 1910 after the battles around Haymarket over Hart, Schaffner, Marx. Some 30,000 workers formed their first union, and the introduction of the idea of that workers had rights in this country. So we have a history of influence that has shaped us and certainly influences us, but the history of genocide, slavery in this country, the genocide of the indigenous people certainly shaped what we know, and one of the things that we had to teach our members is the concept of the slaveholders' rebellion. What is the slaveholders? We can always look at history from a lot of angles and a lot of perspectives, but one of the things that we had to show is that any time a successful reform or concession was wrestled from the corporations and the wealthy in this country, is that they always ended up coming back and fighting back harder. After the Civil War, in the midst of Reconstruction, the utilization of the Ku Klux Klan and vigilante groups reversed the advances made during the Civil War and Reconstruction and the laws that were passed, leaving 100 years of Jim Crow, murder, and another form of slavery for the African Americans in this country. I think when we look at the National Labor Relations Act as well, immediately there was a laws passed, the Taft-Hartley Act, including later the Red Scare and the attack against the communists and the progressives inside the labor movement that gutted the trade union movement of its essential fighters and leaders inside the trade union movement, that then led to an extended period of business unionism and reshaping of the union movement as a partner of the corporations in this country. In that context, we have tried to show the development of the union movement, what are its influences, and again, restating who are our friends and who are our enemies. And that's no more important than today when our workers, I was in the restroom and somebody asked me about one of the other workshops I was in and asked, well, wait a minute, what do you mean about the working class? And I said, or the middle class? And I said, well, you've never heard me say the words middle class. Middle class is a concept that's manipulated, that is a concept that, first of all, I don't think ever existed, but certainly doesn't exist today. And the majority of union members today are being driven into the ground, increasingly being compelled to fight for the basic necessities of life, for hope, for the potential for their children to do better than they did, as was the dream in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and the reshaping of what is now referred to as a past American dream. We have tried to reconceptualize that. So after a person goes through this leadership school, which is 3.5 days of discussion, and we try to use the popular education method. We show videos, we discuss the videos in order to have a common experience and approach to analyze things, is that there's a second leadership school where the workers actually come in and discuss the strategy of the organization. What is it we need to do? What is it that they've learned? And how do we reshape the union in order to better reflect the needs of the workers today and not the workers of yesterday? In that context, we have tried to build the concept of alliances. In Madison, Wisconsin, our union was the first organization to do a demonstration. Our joint board was the first organization to do a demonstration at a university bookstore over the use of sweatshops in the production of the athletic clothes. And as a result of that demonstration, Students Against Sweatshops was formed in this country. And you all know the history of the role that it's played around the world in trying to deal with the question of sweatshops and, more importantly, of sweatshop products from other countries in the universities, and in most cases has been banned today. So, sort of in building with that idea that no longer can labor do it alone. At one time, if you had 100% support in your factory, you could extract concessions from them, benefits, higher wages, and put the company on the defensive. That is no longer true. Today, if you have that strength, you could still lose the fight, and inevitably the plant could shut down and move on down the road, move to the south, move to Mexico, and inevitably to China. So there's a number of elements that come into play along the lines of the alliances made with Students Against Sweatshops, and that is, what are the alliances that we need today in order to build the kind of social justice movement that workers are now a part of. They're no longer a separate fight just along union lines, but are now a part of the general struggle for social justice in this country, which is, I think, a very important and progressive step forward for our country. is to break the barriers or the walls between organized labor and the overall social justice movement in the form of battling climate change, or the battle to protect or to clean up the environment, or the battle against police brutality, immigrant rights, the battle for rights in the inner cities of this country of opportunity. And but how do we go about doing this? How do we define where we're at? I certainly, in my youth, as a result of my activity in high school, as a result of my activity against the war, I began to study a lot of theory, philosophy, read everything I could. I read voraciously, even though I wasn't in the university. I read sociology books and became quite articulate in creating arguments about philosophy and theory and what's right and what's wrong, and labor value and exchange value and use value. But certainly over the last period of time, many of those issues have become very complicated and more difficult to explain as society has developed, as globalization has occurred, is where is the principle of the national market? Where is the principle of national interest? Where is the principle of right or wrong, of taking care of your own? And I'm glad that that those barriers have been broken down. I grew up thinking, why is my family suffering more than the other families that I see? And I tried to figure out a way to understand that, to do something about it, my family and my community. And I realized after all this study that there was no way that organizing my community was enough for change. I had to reach out. If we organized all the Mexican immigrants in this country, we could not achieve change. Well, then my friends would talk about building alliances with the African American movement for equality and all that. So I explored that avenue and realized that very quickly that 18% of the population could not change this country. So began to figure out what are the things that we need to do to build a broader, larger movement in order to have change in this country that can be sustained, protected, and ultimately one that could protect the children and build a country we could be proud of. I quickly understood that there was only one form, the class struggle. And that class struggle, you know, as I understood it at that time, was at the point of production. The battle inside the factory, the battle inside the workplace. That's no longer true. The fight is no longer solely in the factory. In fact, I think the battle inside the factory follows the social justice battle in society in general. What is lacking, I think, and what we're grappling with in both me, Lauren, Jill Stein, and other people like us, is what is it that replaces this idea and the concept that the battle is at the point of production, or that the struggle by the minorities is the form of that struggle. And realize that we have not built the organization that reflects the needs for that fight. Our joint board with these leaders that went through our schools participated in the formation of the Labor Party after Clinton passed the NAFTA Act in the 1990s. We participated in that for 10 years, and inevitably the unions went back to supporting the Democrats, compounded supporting the Democrats, and the Labor Party ultimately fizzled because it didn't have a grounding to establish itself on. But the concept of a Labor Party, not a party of the unions, not a party of the left, but a party of the working class, employed or unemployed. No matter at what level of stratification, at the higher level of wages or salaries, or at the level of the unemployed and living in poverty, can we have that concept of a Labor Party? And some of us inside of our union, the leaders that we trained in this experiment through the Labor Party, 10 years participated in it. We were the last union to leave. has continued to this day in our minds of figuring out a way to build the proper alliances to reestablish some formation that will represent that. And growing more and more every day, that form potentially right now can be the Green Party. And so building this concept and this alliance, not simply just declaring we're the party, but figuring out a way how to bring all the people out there in struggle, in social struggle, in economic struggles, in political fights, in the battle for democracy. How do we bring ourselves together at the table? In other words, I'm not the leader. How do we get the leaders in the room? And I believe that what we've begun to try to do with the alliances that we've built around the global climate convergence can be a step in the direction of building that process. But first and foremost, we also have to stop the most important intrusions in our communities, either in the environmental front or in the front of driving down people to the level of poverty wages, of no protections in labor. I mean, we have fought. One of the people that was at the core of the formation of the Labor Party was Tony Mazzocchi, who was considered the father of a lot of the OSHA legislation in this country. As OSHA legislation developed in this country, it impacted very much the environmental movement. It's a natural alliance, it's a natural relationship, and we have to do everything we can, as we have throughout history, is break down the barriers, break down the siloed view we all have of our struggle as the most important struggle, and build the relationship and build the political perspective and the organizational relationship where we can begin to transform this country. In doing that, I participate in the global climate convergence. I participate with a move to amend for the battle for democracy as a way of including our members to participate in those actions, those activities, in those organizational and political activities, that we have to build a people through our organizational relationships that are quite conscious about what they're doing, from passivity to activism, from passivity to activism with a political purpose. Thank you.
Sound also?
No, I don't believe so.
Just the PowerPoint?
Yeah.
I'll plug it in here.
We're gonna what? Okay. I'm gonna start presenting, I think. Is there a password? Hey everybody, we got one more speech to go. And these very fine gentlemen here came a long way, so let's give them a few minutes to set up. I'm not entirely sure. Yeah. Should have a PowerPoint presentation. All right. Hello, everybody. My name's Nate Garol. I'm a second-year law student and one of this year's PIELC co-directors. Thank you. First off, I'd really like to thank our friend from Indonesia, Johari Effendi, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, but he was integral in bringing these gentlemen and their story to PIELC, and it's a very important story. Today, I'm going to introduce two very brave gentlemen, Dominicus Serkanus Bebari and Johannes Amisim Dekme. They've traveled to tell a very great distance to tell you a story of their land, their home, and their mother. For many, including most of us, these are separate, distinct things. But for Dominicus and Johannes and the rest of their tribe, they are one and the same. In 1967, Freeport McMoran came to the Monje and Chamorro land in the Timika area of West Papua, Indonesia, to mine gold and copper. Prior to Freeport's arrival, these tribes practiced a subsistence economy based on sustainable agriculture and forest products, fishing and hunting. Their cultures were intimately entwined with the surrounding landscape. Land is my mother is the mythology of the Monje and Chamorro tribes in Papua. They call their land Bumi Amungsa. The mountain, valley, and lowland are all part of the body of their mother. And as a holistic body, when one part is wounded, the entire body feels pain. Since PT Freeport's arrival, it has become one of the largest gold mining operations in the world, and the world's third largest copper producer. Despite the large capital wealth produced and the despoliation of their land, the Monje and Chamorro tribes only receive 0.01% of the total gross profit and are not allotted any shares in the mining operations. Basically, Freeport's presence has caused a massive, permanent, and escalating disruption to the lives of the Monje and Chamorro. Freeport Indonesia has the ability to provide economic benefits to local communities, but it chooses not to. And as a result, these communities are severely impoverished and their future is threatened. In short, their land, which is their mother, is being lost. Through this presentation, we will hear about the mythological meaning of the Monje and Chamorro land, how this belief is maintained despite the continued mining, and how they approach conflict resolution with the mining companies. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Demi Bebari and Johannes Dekme, representatives of the Monje and Chamorro tribes, and their translator, Intan Suwandi, a PhD student here at the University of Oregon.
Thank you very much. My name is Demi Bebari and my friend Johannes Amisim Dekme from West Papua, Indonesia. Name institution, Lembaga Musyawarah Adat Suku Amume.
So they represent an organization of their tribal indigenous society called Lemasa.
Lemasa adalah lembaga representasi dari suku Amume di Papua Barat, salah satu suku dari 260 suku yang ada di Papua.
So Lemasa, the organization, the tribal organization, is a representation of the tribe, the Amungme tribe, which is one of about 260 tribes that now exist in Papua.
Wets Papua berada di negara Republik Indonesia, bergabung dengan Indonesia pada tahun 1969 melalui PPRA yang dilangsungkan oleh PBB pada tahun 1969.
So Papua joined, quote unquote, Indonesia in 1969 through a referendum, and the United Nations was the entity that was also there during the referendum.
Pulau Papua merupakan pulau terbesar nomor 1 di dunia yang dibagi menjadi 2 oleh Belanda dan Jerman. Belanda menguasai Papua Barat dan Jerman dan Inggris menguasai Papua bagian timur yang sudah merdeka, yaitu Papua New Guinea.
So Papua is actually one of the largest islands in the world, probably number 2, and it's divided into two divisions, West and the East. And the West Papua was a source of conflict between the Dutch and the German. And the Dutch had the western part, while Germany and UK had the eastern part.
Papua memiliki suku-suku yang cukup banyak, sebanyak 260 suku, dan salah satunya adalah suku Amungme.
And there are about 260 tribes in Papua, so Amungme and Komoro are 2 of them.
Suku Amungme berada di bagian selatan di pegunungan Kartengs, yang dalam bahasa Amungme disebut Nemangkawi, yang artinya anak panah putih.
They're located in the southern part of Papua, in the mountain area called Namangkawi, or the English word is Kartens, and in their language it means the white arrow.
Inilah wilayah di mana kami berada, pada ketinggian 3.000 kaki dari atas permukaan laut. Tempat kami cukup terjal dengan salju abadi, dengan gunung yang sangat tinggi, dengan sungai-sungai yang mengalir di sekeliling gunung. Disitulah suku Amungme berada.
So this mountain is the home of the Amungme tribe. It has eternal snow, and it has rivers all over it.
Bagi suku Amungme, tanah adalah ibu.
So for the Amungme tribe, the earth is the mother.
Gunung adalah ibu, puncak gunung adalah kepala sang ibu. Leher dan dada adalah bagian kesuburan, dan bagian kaki merupakan daerah perburuan dari suku Amungme.
So the top of the mountain is the head of the mother, and from the neck to the belly button is the valleys, and also the lowland is the lower part area of the mother.
Di bagian kepala adalah tempat untuk berpikir, tempat di mana mata berada untuk melihat, telinga berada untuk mendengar, dan hidung untuk mencium. Itulah bagian yang sangat vital di atas puncak, di atas gunung.
So they believe, yes. So they believe that, I don't know if it's on. So the tribe believes that the top part of the mountain is the most important part because it's the head of the mother, and the head is where the vital organs are. You have the eyes to see, you have the mouth to speak, and most importantly, you have the mind to think.
Di bagian dada sampai ke pusat adalah bagian kesuburan, di mana letak air susu ibu yang memberi kehidupan bagi anak-anak.
And the chest and the breast area until the belly button is also very important because that's where a mother can give a life to her children.
Di bagian pusar sampai di kaki adalah tempat keramat, tempat-tempat pencarian, dan juga tempat-tempat yang indah.
And belly button and below, a lot of them are sacred parts. They are very beautiful, but they are very sacred.
Bagi suku Amume, batu adalah tulang, daging adalah tanah, urat-urat nadi adalah sungai, dan bulu-bulu melambang adalah rerumputan dan pohon-pohon.
In addition to these parts, the mountain has 4 elements. The stone, which is a representation of the mother's bones, and then the river, which is a representation of the mother's veins. The earth or the soil is the meat of the mother, and also the trees are the bodily hair of the mother.
Kami percaya bahwa di saat kami meninggal, arwah kami berada di gunung itu, karena disitulah surga bagi kami.
And most importantly, when we die, we go to these mountains. So this is the afterlife for the Amungme tribe.
Menurut pandangan orang Amungme bahwa di sana ada daun, akar, kulit, bahwa di hutan ini kalau rusak kami tidak punya rumah sakit karena di sana ada daun, akar, kulit untuk menyembuhkan penyakit. Di sana juga ada pusat ekonomi yang bisa mendapat buah-buahan, hasil buruan, binatang untuk melanjutkan hidup. Dan di sana juga pusat pendidikan. Bagaimana orang tua mewariskan pendidikan kepada anak dan cucu. Kalau itu rusak, sama saja bunuh ibu atau bunuh kami.
So in this mountain, the mountain has a lot of functions. First, this is their hospital, because if somebody is ill, this is where they get the herbs to cure the ones who are sick. And this is also the center of their economy, because they hunt and get a lot of things for them to survive. And lastly, and this is also our children's schools, because this is the site, the area where parents teach their children their skills to survive. So if this is destroyed, it means that their life is destroyed. It means that the mother is destroyed.
Gunung, lembah, lereng, dataran rendah, dan segala-galanya rusak. Artinya merusak ibu tidak lain adalah merusak kami. Dan bagaimana kalau rusak saya, bagaimana saya mewariskan hak itu kepada anak dan cucu saya.
And if the mother is killed, that means you kill us too. And how are we supposed to inherit these things to our children?
Dari sini seperti apa, dari alam asli ini seperti apa berubah dengan adanya Freeport melalui pemerintah Indonesia, dan dampaknya seperti apa, dan saya harus kemana, dan luar biasa saya bisa datang di sini, bisa menyampaikan apa yang menjadi keluhan kita.
So everything was destroyed since Freeport came to Papua. So we want to know, what are we going to do because of this destruction? Because you're going to kill us all.
Jadi di daerah ini, di bagian gunung itu ada suku Amungme, dan bagian dataran rendah sampai ke laut itu ada suku Kamoro. Dampaknya seperti apa nanti kita akan lihat tayangan berikut.
So the Amungme lives on the top of the mountains, and the Kamoro tribe lives on the lowland area. And we will see on the next slides what kind of destructions that Freeport has done to Papua.
Ya, itulah mitologi tentang suku Amungme atas tanah ulayatnya.
And that was what we just said was the mythology, our mythology, the Amungme mythology of our earth.
Dan gunung itu kini sudah berubah, telah hancur lebur.
And our home has been destroyed.
Dua gunung, yang ini adalah Gunung Edsberg, telah digali oleh PT Freeport Indonesia sejak tahun 1974 sampai tahun 1980 dengan diameter 360 meter kedalaman dengan meraut 700 billion dolar.
So this is the first mountain that Freeport mined. This is the first mountain that they destroyed in the span from 73 to 80. And during that period, Freeport had taken $700 billion.
Ini adalah gunung yang berikut. Gunung kedua yang sudah dihancurkan oleh Freeport Indonesia, anak perusahaan dari Freeport, McMoran Copper and Gold, yang bermarkas di New Orleans, Amerika Serikat.
And this is the second mountain that they destroyed. The one who controlled the operation is called Freeport Indonesia, but the main company is Freeport McMoran that is based in New Orleans.
Inilah pendapatan Freeport Indonesia dari perhitungan kami selama ini. Setiap hari 350.000 ton konsentrat yang menghasilkan 11 sampai 14 gram emas.
So this is list of revenues that Freeport has divided by day, week, month, and year. And each day they can get 11 to 14 grams of gold. And as you can see here, yearly the total, the estimated is about $1.7 billion.
Ini adalah tingkat produksi dan juga penghasilan dari Freeport Indonesia. 3 tahun terakhir, di mana Freeport Indonesia merupakan perusahaan emas terbesar nomor 1 dunia dan penghasil tembaga nomor 3 dunia dengan biaya produksi yang sangat rendah.
So this is the list of the production cost and the commodity production of Freeport Indonesia. The first or the largest company in terms of gold mining, and the third in the world in terms of copper mining. And you can see that the production cost is really, really low.
Inilah areal kontrak karya PT Freeport Indonesia seluas 2.600.000 hektar sepanjang Teluk Etna sampai perbatasan Republik Indonesia dan Papua Nugini.
So this is the area where Freeport mines have been located all this time. They never moved, and you can see that it spread all the way towards the border between Indonesia and Papua New Guinea.
Dampak kehancuran yang dialami oleh masyarakat Amume dan Kamoro serta seluruh masyarakat yang berada di Kabupaten Mimika, Provinsi Papua. Kerusakan lingkungan.
So this is a list of damages, the environmental damage that Freeport mines have done, especially in relation to the river.
Areal kota Timika berada di sekitar areal pembuangan tailing PT Freeport Indonesia, hanya jarak 200 meter dari sungai yang tercemar tailing.
So Timika is a big city here, the one on the right. The location between Timika and the waste disposal of Freeport is only about 200 meters, so it's really close.
Tailing yang dibuang Freeport ke sungai telah menghancurkan 162.000 meter persegi. Hutan, sungai telah hancur. 162.000.
So about 162,000 square meters have been destroyed because of the waste itself.
Dan juga udara di Timika telah tercemar oleh merkuri yang sudah berada pada ambang batas.
And the air is really heavily polluted with mercury, which is above the level of what can be accepted.
Tailing telah membuat kondisi tanah berubah. Tailing telah membuat tanah menjadi hancur, dan tailing yang diturunkan oleh Freeport menambah tingginya tanah setinggi 10 meter dari permukaan tanah.
And the waste also destroyed the soil a lot. And what we mean by waste is all the materials, including sands, rocks, and also other dangerous material and dangerous chemicals. They destroyed the soil, and also it raised the surface of the land for 10 meters.
Dan juga sumur-sumur, tumbuh-tumbuhan, dan segala makhluk yang ada di atas tanah seluas 162.000 meter persegi juga telah hancur. Ada perubahan dalam sumur air minum, dan juga terjadi pendangkalan di pesisir pantai setinggi 10 meter sepanjang pantai di Laut Arafura.
Other effects including all of the plants surrounding the area are not productive anymore, and then the wells, more importantly, are heavily polluted. So the wells where locals get their water from.
Inilah tailing sisa pasir tambang Freeport yang dibuang ke sungai. Dari estimasi 2008 sudah mencapai 861.000 miliar ton. Dan di tahun 2041 pada pasca tambang 2041 ditaksir sebesar 4 triliun ton tailing.
And yeah, this is the estimated, I think it's pretty obvious here, is the estimated waste or tailing, Freeport's tailing. In 2008, it was at 861 million, and by 2041, which is the end of their contract, it's estimated to be 4 billion ton.
Inilah dampak dari kehancuran baik dari puncak gunung sampai ke dataran rendah, di mana kehidupan masyarakat secara mitologi telah dihancurkan. Kehidupan mereka telah dihancurkan sehingga
where they gave money to local tribes, that is precisely where local conflicts or tribal conflicts increase.
Konflik komunal perang suku hampir setiap tahun terjadi. Sejak tahun 1996 sampai saat ini masih terjadi.
And this conflict happened continuously since 1996.
Persatuan dan kesatuan orang Amume dan suku-suku telah dilumpuhkan, hancur, terjadi kecemburuan sosial, dan banyak sekali terjadi permusuhan di kalangan suku-suku.
So the unity between tribes has been heavily negatively impacted because of Freeport's programs, because there's a lot of conflicts in relation to the corporate social responsibility issue that divided these tribes.
Sehingga persatuan dan kesatuan masyarakat untuk menuntut, meminta hak-haknya tidak bisa dilakukan.
And this is really significant, especially to the fact that this prohibits or prevents people or tribes to go together and fight the company.
Pemimpin suku Amume, Tobianal, pernah melakukan upaya hukum ke pengadilan federal Louisiana, Amerika Serikat. Tapi dipersulit untuk mendapatkan visa dan keluar negeri sehingga gugatannya gugur.
So Tom Daniel is one of Amume's tribe's leader, and he did file a lawsuit, and supposedly the lawsuit was supposed to lead to trials in Louisiana, but the American government actually gave him a lot of problems in getting his visa, so he could never make it to the U.S., and therefore the lawsuit was canceled.
Dan juga seorang tokoh perempuan, Josepa Lomang, juga melakukan gugatan yang sama terhadap Freeport Indonesia, namun mengalami nasib yang sama.
And this is an Amume woman, and she also filed a lawsuit, but she experienced the same issue as Tom.
Inilah posisi kepemilikan saham Freeport Indonesia. Freeport Moran memiliki saham 80%. Kemudian Indonesia memiliki saham 10%. Kemudian Bakri di Indonesia menguasai 9%. Dan 1% diberikan oleh Freeport sebagai CSR dalam program sosial Freeport.
So this is who owns the stock of the company, and you can see that Freeport is 80% and another company is 9%. Freeport Indonesia is 10%. So this Freeport is Freeport McMoran. And as you can see, only 1% goes supposedly to the local, but through this problematic corporate social responsibility program.
Terima kasih banyak. Kami berharap ada support dari peserta konferensi kali ini untuk mendorong proses negosiasi dan juga advokasi dalam mendukung Amume dan Kamoro mendapatkan kompensasi dari Freeport McMoran sebagai induk perusahaan Freeport Indonesia.
They are currently in the struggle to having a negotiation with Freeport, and they're hoping that Freeport will compensate all the things that they have done to Papua. And they are really hoping that you will support this struggle.
Freeport akan meninggalkan tanah adat kami pada 2041. Tetapi apakah nasib kami akan berubah ataukah kami akan ditinggalkan juga dan menerima kehancuran?
The contract will end in 2041, and that's when Freeport is supposed to leave Papua. But they are wondering what will happen next. Are they going to leave and everything will be okay? Or are we left with the destruction and everything else?
Inilah situasi kami. Kami miskin di atas kekayaan kami. kekayaan kami diambil habis, dan kami hidup dalam kemiskinan.
So this is our situation. We are impoverished, even though we are rich, because somebody else took that away from us, took that wealth away from us. They robbed us.
Demikian dan thank you very much.
Thank you. And actually, they want to present something to the co-director quickly, to the co-directors of this conference. So if you can come up here.
And the hat is actually out there. Sorry, it's in that box over there.
Satu ibu, satu bapak, ibu kasih pakai topi. Terus yang lain kita kasih pakai
Okay. Yeah.
So they are giving several things that belong to the Amungme tribes. One of them is the hat, and the hat, I was told, is a leadership symbol. So they want to give these hats to the co-directors. Okay. Are you all equal, or okay? So maybe you can give it to Nate, one of them. So this is a symbol that they are hoping that even after the conference, the leaders of this conference can continue the conversations, and hopefully what we are talking about now can lead to something else.
Saya kasih pakai topi ini artinya mereka adalah kepala perang yang nantinya akan memperjuangkan apa yang kami sampaikan saat ini.
So the hats are the symbol that they are the leaders of the war, and they will have to continue the message that is given today. And this is another one. This is a bag. They call it noken.
Noken adalah itu sebuah tas yang dimana apa yang kita sampaikan dan juga masyarakat kita tolong isi baik-baik di dalam noken ini dan jangan buang kita.
So the bag is the symbol to hold things that we have talked about today, the information that we have given. Please take care of them, please keep them, and don't throw them away. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming here to witness these keynotes. They're very powerful. I know they affected me a lot. We have some more awesome keynotes later on tonight and a few special events things going on this afternoon. So check out your schedule and we'll see you later.